Welcome to our little bookseller. It's been a little while. I think it's been 10 or 11 days, which is eternity on this channel, isn't it? We're always doing something. And today we're going to talk about The Sub by Thomas M. Disch. But before I plunge into a review of that, I'm going to tell you what I've been doing. Well, I did film a couple of things, or attempted to film a couple of things, which didn't come off. I did an out and about, which I wasn't very satisfied with. I thought it was quite boring, so I ditched it. And I also did a visit to a bookshop in Bristol I was invited to called Second Page, which is a second-hand bookshop, and I shot some video there and he had lots of interesting stuff, but unfortunately the video I shot in the shop didn't come out, and that's pretty much the first time that's happened, so that's gone on the back burner, but I have to visit again. Right, here it is, Second Page. It's quite a good name for a second-hand bookshop, isn't it? Let's have a look now. Okay, so we'll take out the window. So all the time and the money that day was completely lost, and I did buy one book there, which is this one, 1985 by Anthony Burgess. This is the Arrow 1980 edition, first published in 78 by Hutchinson, and I used to have this back in the day, and I got rid of it. I've been looking for it in this cover because it is in print, and I sell it regularly at work and have done for years, but I really want to get this cover back, and it's got an essay about 1984, the Orwell novel, in it, and then there's a full-length novel. I would say it is a novel. It's a short novel in there as well, dystopian. I have reread the essay about Orwell, which is good. I don't agree with all of it, but it is really good. And then Burgess's own big book in here I flicked through, and I don't remember thinking it was that great. I will have another go at some point, but that was all I picked up. But when I go to Second Page again, I'll be filming and making sure it comes out next time. So there'll be a few more supplementary things like that later on in the video. So I have had a reading block, as I've said a number of times in the community page and in the club room and elsewhere on the channel. And I did try a Silverberg a while ago to get me back into this, and I had to go at Kingdoms of the Wall, and I love Silverberg, as you know. This is a later Silverberg, and I didn't like this at all, and I talked about that in the club room. But I then decided, and it's been coming for a long time, to do another Thomas M. Disch, because I think in the last couple of years I've reviewed a few Disch novels on the channel, and I've read the early ones many years ago, back in the 1980s. But the Minnesota Supernatural Quartet, I hadn't really gone for. I started to read The Businessman once back in the 80s when it came out, and I didn't get on with it and put it down. But I've been reading these and really enjoying them. So today we're going to talk about The Sub. And the thing about Tom Disch is that the reason why he's so good and why I find him so readable is because he has that mastery of one of the basic verities of good fiction writing, is that he can write about people, characterization. What he does with characters, he recognizes the characters are not an either or, but a both. They're not an individual or a type. Most people are a bit of both. So he recognizes traits which are unique in action and sentiment, and he creates real people who are a mixture of types and individuals. Now, while social shaping, whether it's wider society or family, fosters types and sometimes even stereotypes, which are true because we see them. Cliches are true because we see these things in reality. Possibly genetics forges individuality, which is further whittled away to a fine point by formative experiences, whether they be in childhood, adolescent, or later on. And these are often contingent and chance-led. So even though Disch in his career as a science fiction writer, he will employ the novum, the new thing, the particular scenario, most famously in the genocides where giant plants are seeded on Earth by aliens and gradually destroy human civilization. It is a book about people, and that's where the real focus is. So in the Minnesota Supernatural Quartet, which is a thematic tetralogy rather than a single story over 4 volumes, what Disch does, he meddles with both environment around the characters and the inherent nature in the way that it shapes characters by invoking a contingent element that we would call magic rather than a scientific one. And he does this in the sub. He does it in the first volume in the series, The Businessman, which I reviewed a while ago. Then also in the second one, The MD, which I'm yet to read, and because I've read them all out of order. And in the third one, which I think is my favourite, The Priest from the 90s. So they're all set in Minnesota. They all have supernatural concerns, but they're not one story, but they share some common motifs and themes. So we're going to talk about that a bit today, with particular reference to my reading of the sub. And the way that he meddles with things, as I say, is that he puts something supernatural into these character milieus. And these are fantasy novels that were marketed as horror, and horror, of course, is the subset, isn't really a genre, it's a bricolage, and the subset of the horror bricolage that these fall into are they're not science fiction oriented, they're not crime sources, the terror doesn't come from those sources, but they're supernatural ones, as I say. But they are, of course, comic supernatural fantasies, because Disch is quite a witty guy, and they could be said to actually poke fun at the cliches of popular horror writing, which came in the wake of Stephen King, and they sort of ride lightly over the era, but the overbearing demeanour of doom and tragedy that you get in a writer like, say, Stephen King. And Disch instead tends to have fun with his supernatural scenarios and his characters, even when some terrible things happen to them and horrible things happen. You know, he has fun with this common form of American horror, which I think originates tonally with Richard Matheson, which then people like Stephen King, Dan Simmons, Charles L. Grant picked up and ran with, and has became, you know, the dominant sort of mode of writing horror for many decades, both in the UK and America, but particularly in America. So there's this sort of like Gothic town situation of Castle Rock or whatever. But Disch, you know, he's sort of lighter touch than that, and he tends to have fun with it. So as I've said before, he is actually funny, and he's got a kind of obsidian wit, which occasionally prompts a guffaw. You know, now and again you do get the odd laugh, but it's more of a sophisticated, mordant wit, as I always say. And the sub is probably less openly comedic than the first in the sequence, which is The Businessman, which does make you laugh quite a lot, particularly in the closing sections, and less so than The Priest, which is the third in the sequence. But the sub is the last in the sequence, and it came out in 1999. And these books came out over a period of, I think, about 15 years. Is it 99? Let me just double check. Let's just see. Yeah, this is in Knopf, 1999. And Knopf, of course, one of the sort of top literary publishers in the States. And it's got deckled edges as American and world first. Not a difficult book to get, really. And yeah, it's got a pig there, which for reasons which become clear when you read it. And it is less openly funny. It's the least funny of the three I've read, but I absolutely loved it nonetheless. It's fantastic stuff. And something I'll do when I read the MD is I'll try and do an overview of all 4 and try and pull their themes together, but they will come up in this. So what kicks our tail off in the sub is a story. I'll read the blurb because that's the best way to do it. And what it says inside, at the very moment that substitute teacher Diana Turney, substitute teacher, the sub, Diana Turney recovers memories of sexual abuse at the hands of her father, she finds herself wielding a potent brand of witchcraft, the Circe-like ability to turn people into their totemic animals. But once she unleashes these exhilarating metamorphoses on the citizens of the small hamlet of Leech Lake, she learns that she has not been given these powers so much as she has been given to them. that others, including her enemies, have similar gifts, that she's become the conduit of her ghastly father's evil energies, long dormant but now sprung to life, and that despite her unearthly gifts, escape this time might prove improbable. So this substitute teacher, Diana, it opens with a quite funny sequence where she's almost sort of tormenting the children in the care while teaching them Old MacDonald's Farm, the song where you do the oinks of the pigs and the quacks of the ducks and stuff. And the way it sort of pans out is that Diana has a sister called Janet, and Janet has suspected her husband Carl of having a dalliance with a lady called Judy. So first of all, you've got four names. You've got Diana, the sub-teacher. You've got her sister Janet, Janet's husband Carl, and Judy. And Diana's sister Janet suspects Carl of having this dalliance with this woman called Judy. And she gets rather annoyed, and Janet shoots Carl in the arm. She chases after them, and nothing's actually gone on, though Judy is a little bit of a character, as you will see. And he won't testify against her in court, but she ends up in the can for a year, so she has to go to prison. So Carl and Janet's child, Kelly, a little girl, who's really wonderfully depicted in the subject, very funny character and genuinely childlike. Janet ends up in the can, and then Diana, the substitute teacher, has to move in with Carl to look after Judy. So she takes her sister's place in the menage in the household. And Carl is a kind of laid back guy, and he's a prison guard. And interestingly, somebody who is a inmate in the prison where Carl works is a guy called Jim Cottonwood, who's a Native American, who interestingly has a shamanic ability. And when we're first introduced to Jim, he is taking on the corporeal form of a crow. He projects his consciousness into a crow's body, and he can fly around. And he's never done it before. It comes to him naturally. So his totem animal is a crow, and he naturally has this ability which he believes is innate and seems to come from nowhere. And of course, the idea is that maybe somewhere in the cosmos there's this store of energy which allows people to do this. And the sub, Diana, has this ability as well, which she has inherited from elsewhere, as we'll come to. So Jim Cottonwood is in the prison. Carl is one of the screws, as I say. And Jim Cottonwood, funnily enough, is in prison for raping Judy 15 years or so earlier. Now, Judy is the lady that Diana's sister Janet suspects of having a dalliance with Carl. So it's pretty labyrinthine. It seems labyrinthine, say. But that's the beauty of it. The great thing about this is that Disch balances all this off really well. And one thing I really hate in a novel is when too many characters are introduced too quickly, like in a first page. And what Disch does over the first 30 or 40 pages, he gradually establishes these people, makes the narrative interesting. You see shafts of his wit in there. And you start to get the feeling, okay, where's this going to go? So basically what happens is that Jim, he's in prison, and he's unhappy because, of course, he's innocent. He didn't actually rape Judy at all. Judy claimed to be raped. And Judy has a secret. And Judy's son, Alan, who is supposedly the offspring of Jim, Alan has decided that he wants to meet his father, and he wants to embrace his Native American ancestry. So he changes his name by deed poll to Cottonwood, and he goes into the prison to talk to his father. And Jim says, look, why don't you get a DNA test done? You're not my son, and this will prove it. And Alan thinks, wow, if this guy's not my father, then he's innocent. He shouldn't be in prison. And just to give you an idea of what the writing is like, this is an excerpt where, from Jim's point of view, we see Alan, his supposed son. And there he was, entering at the visitor's door ahead of the CO who'd processed him. Even at this distance, Jim began to heat up and shrivel with embarrassment. The kid looked like a tubby fourth grader, inflated to adult size, with nothing changed except the addition of a peach fuzz moustache and a lank mop of blonde hair meant to evoke John Bon Jovi. He was wearing a cowboy shirt a couple of sizes too tight, with a bolo tie and a turquoise and silver belt buckle that matched the clasp of the tie. Boots too? No. What was even more Native American than cowboy boots? Beaded moccasins. Where was the war bonnet? So you get an idea of that. So you've got this labyrinthine family situation, these connections between people. And what happens is that Diana, the substitute teacher, she begins to become more aware of her own ability to deal with totemic forms, and that she can turn people. She's a literal witch in the old school sort of European fairy tale sense. She can turn people into animals, but she can only turn them. So she can't look at somebody and say, "Oh, you'll be a frog." She has to divine what sort of animal they are, and she turns them into animals. And she sees an awful lot of people who are pigs. So you can see what way that goes. So it's got a kind of an Animal Farm thing going on to it. And I mean, when I was reading it, the thing about it is that it's not really irreverent towards Native Americans. It's just using some of the ideas, and it compares the idea of the sweat lodge to something which is seminal. I mean, out back of the house where the main characters live, there's an old abandoned sort of steakhouse where meat used to be cured, and that is where the ghost of Diana's father, the sub's father, who abused her as a child, is present. So you've got this kind of cosmology where there's reincarnation as well. When characters die, they're often reincarnated as animals, and you see them taking part in the plot as animals. One of them is transformed into a spider, which is quite interesting. I won't tell you any more about that. And you also get this thing about the sort of sins of the father being passed on to the children, not just the son, but the daughters as well. And that made me think of the Native American SF writer Craig Key Street, he's more commonly known as. And this is Death in the Spirit House. This is one of his novels. Nobody ever talks about Craig Key Street. I think I've mentioned him briefly a couple of times. I will talk about him soon, because he is one of those people, you know, the way now that everything is about identity politics. Well, he is like the genuine article Native American SF writer. And I've been reading him since the 80s. So I will talk about him at some point. This book's interesting because it was there was a plagiarism case around this, but I'll talk about that when I come to cover that on the channel with you. So you've got this wonderful melange of witchcraft, shamanism, these different characters. There's an awful lot about lust and drinking in the book as well. You know, Disch is very good at dealing with the carnality of people and their physicality. And he's always quite happy to make people the butt of jokes, but he's also sympathetic as well. You know, it's even when you feel that he's, you know, maybe looking down on characters, he's not, you know, he's not looking down on them. He's just depicting them the way they are. That mixture of stereotype and individual, the two things together, they're fully rounded. We recognize them, and yet at the same time they're unique. And the way he depicts Alan there in that paragraph, I mean, Alan's a really nice young man, and he has this one little malady which nobody ever writes about, and it's done in a fantastic way in this. And he unfortunately falls under Diana, the sub's influence. So there isn't, as I say, no large sort of religious system. There's no God and no devil in this. There is a reference in the plot to Catholicism, which Disch hated, which is managed big time in The Priest. Not so much, it's handled through one character in the sub, and it's handled well. So it does come up, and that is one of his perennial concerns. So there's kind of reincarnation, but there's no God and the devil, and you never get this dramatic thing where, you know, this higher power appears. You get the feeling that there's a succession of planes higher up than the whole idea of totem animals and reincarnation. And crows play a big part in it. Several characters from the Native American end can sort of project their consciousness into crows. So it is very good, and in some ways it's a traditional haunting and ghost story, but because of the way that he handles the characters, it's very amusing and engaging, and it does keep the pages turning, and you find yourself enjoying all the characters. At no moment did I find it really horrific. It's more sympathetic, and Disch is sort of stepping back saying, you know, I'm not going to sort of pour on all these sort of, you know, cliches, these gothic cliches. He's more interested in telling you an amusing tale, and they're the sort of things that if you filmed them literally, it would come across as a lot more unpleasant and horrific than it actually does in the writing. But as I say, the sub is a lot milder than The Priest and The Businessman are not as funny. So he was possibly moving to a new phase of his writing, but we'll see about that another time. So that was something I really enjoyed. It was great. But of course, I picked up another book now. I'm not enjoying it anywhere near as much. So this is the whole thing. What do you do when you have writers you can always turn to who never let you down, and you go to other people when you're having a bit of a reading block and they're not as good? It is a dilemma. So as I've said a while ago, I think this summer I'm going to try, not this summer, this season, because it's been snowing today outside, I'm going to try and just read a lot of writers I like, and Silverberg was part of that, but he kind of let me down with that one, which is an unusual thing. Just to finish off, I have another card from Bruce Harper in Toronto. Bruce also sends cards to John at Sci-Fi Scavenger and to Richard at Vintage SF. It's a nice card, actually. And of course, it's another Penguin one of Roadside Picnic. That's the edition I have. And he says, this is from early November. Just finished reading Roadside Picnic yesterday. It's my new favourite Russian novel. Well, there you go. Creative take on first content, and the dark aspects make it stand out. Thanks for encouraging me to read it through your must-read list book. Enjoying the Club Room videos. Great to see Richard and the return of the grumpy old men. Well, thanks for that, Bruce. So there you go. I'm hoping there's going to be another grumpy old video soon with me and Graham. We may shoot it next week. Depends on if we can get it together. Not sure we're going to cover yet. And there will be another video coming up soon. There's a career overview coming up very soon of a very famous SF writer, looking at his work across the board. And there will be a specific spin-off video from that, looking in depth at one story and its significance, and that'll be in the Club Room, which is $4.99 a month. Anyway, it's good to be back. It's great to see you. Hope you're all well. Let me know what you've been reading, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.